Mao Zedong was born on a cold December day in 1893. His home was a small farming village called Shaoshan, nestled in the green hills of Hunan province. His father had started as a poor farmer. He had worked his way up to become a landowner and grain dealer. He was a strict man who expected his son to work hard on the farm and in the family business. Mao, however, had other ideas. He loved to read books, devouring tales of ancient Chinese emperors. He loved to read books, devouring tales of rebellious heroes. He loved to read books, devouring stories from faraway lands. He often clashed with his father, who saw little value in the world of books when there was real work to be done in the fields. This early tension between father and son was a sign of the larger conflicts to come in Mao's life. He felt a deep connection to the poor farmers around him, yet he was the son of a man who was becoming wealthier than his neighbors. This gave him a unique view of the world. He saw the struggles of the common people up close, but he also had the chance to get an education, something most village boys could only dream of. He left home at the age of 16 to attend a modern school in a nearby city. This was a huge step, taking him away from the old traditional world of his village and into a new world buzzing with radical ideas and a sense of crisis. In school, Mao was like a sponge, soaking up knowledge about politics, soaking up knowledge about history, soaking up knowledge about philosophy. China at this time was a place of great change and uncertainty. The old Qing dynasty, which had ruled for centuries, was weak and crumbling. Foreign powers had carved up parts of China for themselves, humiliating the once great nation. To understand Mao, we must first understand the China he was born into. It was a vast and ancient empire in a state of profound crisis. By the early 20th century, that pride had been shattered. The ruling Qing dynasty was corrupt and collapsed. Foreign powers, Europe, America, Japan, unequal treaties forced on China, ports trade territory, century of humiliation, ordinary lives, immense hardship. Most were peasants, small villages, tiny plots of land, at the mercy of droughts, floods, famines, heavy taxes, high rents to landlords trapped in poverty. Warlords ruled regions and fought constantly. Their armies marched through the countryside. As a young man, Mao Zedong moved to Beijing, the political and intellectual heart of China. He took a humble job as a library assistant at Peking University. While his position was minor, it placed him at the center of the most exciting debates. He was surrounded by the nation's brightest minds, students, professors. It was here Mao first encountered the theories of Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, the idea of class struggle, revolution, the creation of a communist state. These resonated with him. Mao was in Beijing during the May 4th movement of 1919, a massive student protest. It challenged the government's weak response to the Treaty of Versailles, which handed German-controlled Chinese territories to Japan. The event was a turning point for many young Chinese, including Mao. It confirmed that the existing government was hopeless, and that more radical action was necessary. In 1921, Mao was one of about a dozen men who met secretly in a girls' school in Shanghai to found the Communist Party of China. At that small meeting, no one imagined this tiny group would rule the world's most populous nation. In the early CPC years, the party followed Soviet instructions. The Soviets believed revolution should start in cities, led by factory workers. Mao began to develop his own ideas. Based on his upbringing in Hunan, he argued real revolutionary power wasn't the city workers, but the vast, oppressed peasant population. He spent time in the countryside, studying farmers' lives, listening to their grievances, organizing them. He wrote reports arguing that if communists won peasant support, they would become an unstoppable force, a mighty storm sweeping all before it. This focus on the peasantry put Mao at odds with other CPC leaders. They called his ideas unorthodox, but Mao's practical experience and connection with rural people proved effective. He learned to speak their language, organize them into unions and militias, and promised them the one thing they wanted most: their own land. The 1920s and 1930s were a time of brutal conflict in China. The Communist Party had initially formed an alliance with the larger Nationalist Party led by Chiang Kai-shek. In 1927, Chiang suddenly turned on his communist allies in the Shanghai Massacre. Thousands of communists were rounded up and executed. This betrayal forced Mao and the surviving members of the CPC to flee to the remote, mountainous countryside of Jiangxi province. There they established a small communist state, a Soviet, where they put their ideas about land reform and peasant government into practice, creating a base for their revolutionary army. Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalist government were determined to wipe out this communist threat completely. They launched a series of massive military campaigns, encircling the communist base in Jiangxi with hundreds of thousands of soldiers. By 1934, Mao and the Red Army were trapped, facing starvation and annihilation. In a desperate gamble to survive, they decided to break out of the encirclement and embark on an epic retreat. This was the beginning of the Long March, a grueling trek that lasted for an entire year. Around 86,000 soldiers and party members set out, marching over 6,000 miles across some of China's most difficult and treacherous terrain. They crossed snow-capped mountains, raging rivers, and desolate grasslands, all while being constantly pursued and bombed by nationalist forces. They fought dozens of battles, faced starvation, and battled disease. The conditions were unimaginably harsh. Soldiers were forced to eat leather from their belts and shoes to survive. Fewer than 10,000 made it to the final destination in the northern province of Shanxi. During the march, at a critical meeting in the town of Zunyi, Mao criticized the previous party leadership and argued his strategies were the only way forward. After the long march, Mao and his followers set up a new base in the barren hills around Yan'an. This remote outpost became the capital of Communist China for the next decade. Life there was simple and hard. It was here Mao consolidated his power and refined his revolutionary theories. He wrote extensively on military strategy and political philosophy, building a disciplined party and a loyal Red Army. In 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China, the beginning of World War II in Asia. The invasion was brutal, including horrific atrocities like the Nanjing Massacre. Faced with a common enemy, nationalists and communists formed a united front, fragile and full of suspicion. Chiang's main armies bore the brunt in conventional battles, while Mao used guerrilla warfare to harass the enemy behind their lines. Mao's strategy proved highly effective militarily and politically as well. The nationalist government was forced to retreat inland, losing major cities and industrial centers. The communists expanded their influence in the countryside, portrayed as heroic defenders of the people, while political organizers implemented land reform, winning the support and loyalty of millions of peasants. The long war against Japan exhausted and weakened the nationalist government. The Communist Party grew stronger, larger, and more popular than ever before. Once Japan surrendered in 1945, the fragile truce immediately shattered. The Chinese Civil War erupted with full force. At first, the nationalists seemed to have the upper hand. A larger army, superior weapons, and US support. However, their government was plagued by corruption, hyperinflation, and a lack of popular support. In contrast, Mao's Red Army, now the People's Liberation Army, was highly motivated and disciplined, with overwhelming peasant support. Using brilliant military tactics, the PLA systematically defeated the larger nationalist armies in decisive battles across northern China. The balance of power shifted, irreversibly. By 1949, the tide of the Civil War had turned decisively. The communist armies swept south. They captured city after city with surprisingly little resistance. The nationalist government, its armies collapsing and its legitimacy in tatters, crumbled completely. Chiang Kai-shek, remnants of his government. 2 million of his followers fled across the sea to Taiwan, vowing one day to return. Back in Beijing, the communists were preparing to announce their victory to the world. A new era for China was about to begin, shaped by the vision and will of Mao Zedong. On October 1, 1949, Mao stood atop the Gate of Heavenly Peace in Tiananmen Square, before a massive cheering crowd. He declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. The Chinese people have stood up. His words captured the immense sense of pride, hope, and relief felt by many Chinese people. After a century of humiliation and war, China was finally united under a strong, centralized government. For millions who had known only poverty, the promise of a new China brought hope for a better life, stability, dignity, national strength. The new government moved quickly to consolidate control and transform society. One of its first and most popular policies was nationwide land reform. Party workers went into villages across the country. They overthrew the old landlord class. Land was taken from wealthy owners and redistributed to the poor peasants who had farmed it for generations. This policy fulfilled a long-held promise and secured the fierce loyalty of hundreds of millions of peasants. Receiving a title deed was a life-changing event, the realization of a centuries-old dream. Alongside popular reforms, the new state showed its authoritarian side, eliminating potential opposition. Former nationalist officials, businessmen, intellectuals, anyone deemed counter-revolutionary, were targeted. The party controlled press, schools, and public expression, building a powerful cult of personality around Chairman Mao, the savior of the nation. China had stood up, but individual freedom yielded to the collective. By the late 1950s, Mao Zedong was growing impatient. He believed the pace of change was too slow. He dreamed of transforming China into a modern industrial superpower, not in decades but in years. In 1958, he launched the Great Leap Forward. The plan was to mobilize the entire population. The core involved reorganizing the countryside. Private farming was abolished. Peasants were forced into people's communes. Land, tools, labor merged. The second part pushed industrial production, especially steel. Mao saw steel as the key metric. He ordered millions of backyard furnaces in villages and city neighborhoods. Everyone was mobilized. Farmers, teachers, doctors, students, melting pots and pans, door hinges, farming tools. The aim: surpass Great Britain's industrial output fast. The country was gripped by a frenzy of activity, driven by political pressure and utopian promises. But the results were catastrophic. Backyard furnaces produced useless lumps of metal and wasted fuel and labor. Millions of farmers were pulled from fields. Communes were poorly managed. Without private incentives, food production plummeted. Officials exaggerated harvests to please leaders. The state seized huge amounts of grain for cities and export, leaving peasants with almost nothing. What followed was the worst famine in human history. From 1959 to 1962, China plunged into starvation. People ate tree bark. They ate leaves. They scavenged whatever they could find. The government blamed bad weather while hiding the disaster. The real cause was the Great Leap Forward's policies. An estimated 20 to 45 million people died. What began as optimistic utopia became unimaginable human tragedy, a warning about radical utopianism and centralized power. After the catastrophic failure of the Great Leap Forward, Mao's prestige was severely damaged. He stepped back from day-to-day rule. Moderates like Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping took charge, introducing practical policies, allowing small private plots and dismantling parts of the commune system. The economy began to recover and normalcy returned. But Mao saw this as a betrayal of revolutionary principles. He feared bureaucracy and a return to capitalism. He argued a new revolution was needed. In 1966, Mao launched the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. He called on youth to bombard the headquarters, to rise up against party officials. He targeted old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits. Millions of students formed paramilitary Red Guards. Empowered, they rampaged across the country. The Cultural Revolution plunged China into a decade of terror. Red Guards publicly humiliated teachers. They tortured others. Some were killed. Victims included teachers, school administrators, and even their own parents. Temples were destroyed. Ancient art was smashed. Books were burned. Artifacts were lost. High-ranking officials like Liu Shaoqi were purged and denounced. People were imprisoned. No one was safe. A comment, a foreign book, a family tie could mean persecution. Schools and universities closed for years, a lost generation. Factions fought one another, pushing China toward near civil war. The economy stalled, and society was torn apart. Mao called in the army and sent Red Guards to the countryside. Chaos eased by 1969. but turmoil ran until Mao's death in 1976. The Cultural Revolution became a profound national trauma that shattered countless lives. Mao Zedong died on September 9, 1976, after ruling China for 27 years. His death marked the end of an era, leaving behind a country profoundly transformed, but also deeply scarred. The legacy he left is complex, monumental, and fiercely debated. On one hand, he is credited with unifying a nation fractured for over a century. He ended the century of humiliation. He drove out foreign powers and made China a strong, independent nation on the world stage. He is seen as the great unifier, founder of modern China. Under his rule, literacy rose dramatically, and life expectancy nearly doubled, thanks to public hygiene and basic healthcare. The status of women was raised with new laws and opportunities. Women hold up half the sky. For these achievements, many, especially older generations, still revere him. His portrait hangs over Tiananmen. His body lies in a mausoleum, symbols of the nation's founding. However, this positive narrative contrasts with immense suffering from his radical policies. Political purges, the man-made famine of the Great Leap Forward, and the brutal chaos of the Cultural Revolution resulted in the deaths of tens of millions. His rule destroyed traditional culture, dismantled the economy, and subjected people to political terror. This dark side is often downplayed or censored within China. But for millions, the memory of Mao is pain and tragedy. Today, the Communist Party's verdict, 70% good, 30% bad, separating early achievements from later mistakes, allowing continuity while moving away from his chaotic style. For the world, Mao remains one of the 20th century's most influential and controversial figures. A brilliant revolutionary, poet, and strategist, and a ruthless dictator whose utopian visions caused vast human catastrophe. His legacy reminds us how dreams to change the world can inspire and destroy.